everyone, Babs Hockey here with the Player Coach Podcast. Here, I'll give you multiple perspectives from a player and a coach so you can see the game from multiple viewpoints. And I'll give you the latest in hockey IQ development so you can make better decisions and take your game to the next level. Today, I want to talk about a very interesting topic. I've had some deep discussions with some different players, and it's why block shots and plus minus are the worst stats in hockey. Now, context is everything. I've done that podcast early on. If you haven't listened to it, make sure to go back and listen to it because that's really important before you listen to this one. But I'm going to go down both these two statistics and really get a better understanding of why they're not the best indicators of how you're playing. And so we want to really, when I talked about short-term pain and long-term gain, I talked about how you have to be careful how you use statistics and outcome as a gauge for where you're at development-wise. It really should be a guide, not an end-all, be-all, absolute to where your development's at. And so I want to first talk about block shots. To clarify, on the PK, the last 2 minutes in the game, a desperate play, block shots are great, absolutely necessary. It's part of the game. You need to be able to block shots. You need to be willing to block shots if you want to play on the PK. You have to be willing to block shots if you want to play in the last 2 minutes of a game. And you need to be willing to block shots on a desperate play when the other team is doing a great job. They break you down and you got to make that block. These are the times when it's necessary. I completely agree. Block shots in these situations are crucial for the game of hockey. Now, why is it the worst stat, one of the worst stats in the game? Well, when coaches use it as a gauge to see if players are competing, or when players use it as an indicator on how they're playing, I think this is the absolute worst way to use the statistic, and it truly does give a poor indication of what the player is doing. Now, if you're a defenseman, you tend to block a little bit more shots. They should have a little bit higher shot blocking averages. But overall, if you're blocking shots a majority of the time, it typically means you're out of position. Unless your team structure is implemented in a way where it forces you to either front pucks or you're the weak side winger and you're a little bit lower and you're going to have to block shots when your system does break down, this is not a good sign. This is similar to when you look at soccer players. They'll use tackles I use it as the equivalent as blocking shots for hockey, but they'll use high average on tackles per game, and some coaches would use that as an indicator of a player playing well, when really it just means they're out of position, and meaning they have to make up for what ground they lost. And so players that show high tackle ratings typically don't have a high level IQ when it comes to soccer. And I see that similarly to hockey. And when players are consistently blocking shots, blocking way too many shots, you're seeing that they're out of position. There's something wrong. Really, it's an indicator of the opposite of what you're typically taught to believe. And really, it gets the group fired up. I have to always come back to this because in my discussions with other players, it tends to get very heated on what they believe it brings to the table. And want to make it clear, it is a great motivator for a team. You love it when you see a teammate that sprawls out to make that big block in a desperation play or on the PK. These are great moments. Even when they're not supposed to, they make that block to make up from a mistake. That fires the team up. That's huge. That's sacrifice. You love seeing that. But we have to be careful how we use this statistic. It's not a great indicator. It's not a very good indicator of how you're playing. You really need to look past the initial situation and really dive deep into the statistic, really understand what it's really indicating. And when you see that your game is filled with just block shots all the time, you're really putting yourself in a bad position in the sense that you're not reading the play quick enough. You can make better decisions without the puck on the defensive end, either closest to the puck carrier or in proximity to the puck carrier. These are things that you need to improve on. So if you do have a high shot block rating, what it indicates is that you need to improve your decision making. You really need to improve your ability to read and anticipate the play when you're closest to the puck carrier and or when you're in proximity to the puck carrier. And what I mean by that is, say you're the winger, you're on top of the circle, the battle's in the corner, you need to be aware of where that defenseman is. We're talking about the strong side ice. And if that puck goes up to the defenseman, you're so puck focused, you don't notice that he's ready to shoot that puck. And then that puck goes up, he shoots it right away, gets it on net, or you block it and you're like, okay, well, great block, but you didn't read the play. You got to anticipate so you can get a stick on puck before it gets up there. Or you close out on the defenseman so that he has to force it back down the wall, or you force him to turn over the puck. So that's how you should use it as an indicator. That's how you can use the block shots statistic to really not see it as a negative or positive, really as just to help you increase your decision making. Notice where your decision making needs to improve so that you can improve your overall game. It's going to set you up so that you can get in the best position to regain puck possession and get back on the offensive side. Now, plus minus. Where you see the benefits of plus minus are on the outliers. So players with high plus minus, really, really high plus minus, or really, really low plus minus gives you a good indication on where they're at. And so if a player has a really, really high plus minus, that's a good indicator. You're going, okay, like this makes sense. Like this is above the average, way above the average. So clearly they're doing something doing something well consistently 5-on-5. Now they could have, their team could be the best team in the league or have the highest goals on even strength. So that could be the case. But for a majority of the time, when it's that outlier, that shows that they're doing something very good on 5-on-5, or they're an impact dynamic player. And same thing on the really, really low end. And this was the big knock on Ovechkin several years ago when he had that 50-goal season, one of his 50-goal seasons, but he had the worst plus minus in the league. And so it's a good indicator that, okay, there needs to be some work done from the defensive end, or maybe the player's just dominant on the power play, but their 5-on-5 play is just struggling in the D zone, and it really hurts the team long term. And these are just the outliers, though. When we look at the meat in the middle, that plus minus, and every player has lived through this, it is not a good indicator of whether or not a player is playing well or not. It's one of the worst statistics, and frankly, one of the most frustrating statistics as a player. Something I deal with a lot as a pro player, but last year specifically, really one of my jobs was just to be the mediator between players and our assistant coach on making sure plus minus was correct. And it was so frustrating to see how often this was done incorrectly and how many players had to constantly switch it. And if eventually we didn't use it as a gauge anymore because it didn't really show from the middle, that in that middle range between plus 10 and minus 10, it really didn't show anything on whether a player was playing well or not. And it just changes from day to day, from game to game. Someone could come for a change, you step on the ice and the other team scores. That happens all the time. Or you're just back checking. You were first on the forecheck. You made a good check. Defenseman missed their guy on the pinch. They go down and score. How is that your fault? Like I know there's a new statistic with impact plus minus on. It's more specific, and that would be a better way to use plus minus. But the traditional plus minus in that middle majority of players is not a good indicator. Again, every player could take some blame, of course, on some goals, but a majority of the time it's just there's a mistake that happens, and that's that individual. But it doesn't need to be pointed out, especially to the group, unless it's an outlier. When it's an outlier, it's huge. You see the significant difference on the high plus end, high negative end, that's where you see results. Anywhere in the middle where a majority of players are, it's not a good indicator. If anything, it's just super frustrating for players as they keep looking at this plus minus, as coaches use it as a main indicator of how players are playing. And this is, again, players, some of you might be saying, oh, this guy must have a terrible plus minus, that's why he's bringing this up. It's actually no, like I've always had very good plus minus throughout my career. I know that from looking at it, I go, that's not really a good indicator of playing. I've had really good plus minus games where I thought I frankly played terrible. And then there's games where I was doing everything right, but you end up coming out of minus 3, minus 2 in a 6-5 win. And you're just going like, what happened there? Like what's going on? And so there's just too much variables. There's too much variance in the data. And so that's why plus minus in the middle, block shots for what I talked about the majority of the time, not within the context of last 2 minutes, PK, desperation, those plays, that's not what I'm talking about. But when you look at it in the majority, the plus minus, the block shots, there's too much variability in the statistic to give you a clear indication on how a player's playing. And so we don't want to use these as indicators of how you're playing. You really want to use it. You can use it as a guide at times, but really these aren't good statistics. And that's why I say they're the worst stats in hockey, as they're overused and they really cause so much confusion with players. So that's my take on it. Again, you can have your own opinion, but that's how I feel about those two statistics. Now, I like to end, thanks for listening. I like to end off by saying, if you're ever interested in taking your IQ and really sharpening your decision making, like I talked about with the block shots, and really increasing that with and without the puck, the IQ game course and the advanced update is available now. That will really, with over 140 videos, that will take your IQ to that new heights, really allow you to see the game at a different perspective and increase your overall play. And so make sure to click the link in my bio to sign up today and take your game and IQ to the next level.